Okay, so we're ready for the second part of our evening. I am Steve Leone, publisher of the Concord Monitor. And we're turning things around now, where we are going to have members of our Reader Advisory Board ask questions of our reporters and their coverage of Rethinking Rundlett. So the first question is, what the heck is a Reader Advisory Board? And we've been doing it for about 3 years now, and it's members of the community. They apply. We select a range that represents the community. They come in once a month, and we tell them what we do, why we do it, what we're thinking about, but mostly they give us feedback. They ask us questions, lots of questions, and they're really good. And it helps us better understand what the community needs. So I am going to introduce, we have Wendy Lapham, Graham Gifford, and Nick Perencevic, and they are going to ask questions of Catherine McLaughlin, Jeremy Margolis, Michaela Tofigi, Alexander Rapp, and Jonathan Van Fleet. And I'm going to mostly step out of the way, but I am going to kick us off, and I'm going to ask John, who's our editor, if he could just give just a quick recap of the series, why we ended up doing it, what we were trying to accomplish.
Sure, thanks, Steve. The Concord Monitor was getting more and more questions from readers regarding the middle school decision, mainly over the summer. As people were trying to get a handle on the project, they were asking us to ask more questions. And then we had been talking about that as a group, that we should really be trying to use our skills to amass as much information and answer the community's questions as possible. And then when the 1,500 signatures were delivered to the school district that made the 2 ballot questions come up for the charter amendments, that's when we felt a real duty to accelerate and try and get as much information in the community's hands as possible prior to the vote. Granted, we had a presidential election to cover, but we felt that this was our primary goal, and we needed to do this to serve the community. Before I will just say, if you've been following along with the series, it wasn't just done by one reporter. It was a full staff effort, and it has kind of been divided up among the beats of all of our reporters, which has been a really interesting thing for me to see and be a part of.
I'm going to dive right in. This is a question for you, Catherine. After repeated requests from a variety of interested people and organizations, why has there not been a reporting of the cost breakdown? Specifically, where is the breakdown pertaining to the site work and the infrastructure improvements of the new build?
It's a great question. Again, I'm Catherine McLaughlin. Thank you for sticking around. Answering that question, what the up-to-date costs on infrastructure and site work at Broken Ground is easily one of the most popular questions I hear at school board meetings that we get asked all the time. And so as part of this series, we had hoped to be able to answer that as part of it. We felt in order to do an effective, up-to-date comparison between Rundlett and Broken Ground, that getting those figures would be part of that equation. We also figured that the board has approved a $152 million budget cap. To arrive at that number, there had to have been some basic math done by their architects and Harvey Construction to say, okay, this is going to cost this much, and this much, and this much, and you add those things all together and you get 152. We want an understanding of how much of that 152 is those costs. Unfortunately, this is never really the fun part as a reporter. The answer we had to give people was that we don't know. We had asked for those records from the district, and they were not provided by the deadlines that we had given them, and we'd been speaking with them about this for several weeks. So it's more fun as a reporter when you get to give an answer that's conclusive and helpful, and sometimes you have to say, we don't know. And that was the situation here. As to why that number isn't public, it's not a question I can answer.
So just one more follow-up on that. Overall, obtaining the financial transparency of the project. Obviously, it's been difficult. Do you know who's been in charge of that aspect of the project? Who was supposed to have those numbers to give to the community?
So in terms of who develops the numbers, the school district has hired HMFH architects as well as Harvey Construction to do their pre-construction designs and estimates. And so what those actual numbers are is coming from those professionals. In terms of who's responsible for transparency, that falls more to the district and the school board as the public-facing part of the project, as the public officials involved. And so that's kind of the breakdown.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm up next. This question is for Michaela. It was wonderful to see the photo of high school students on the cover or the front page of the newspaper and hear from them in their own words, especially on a topic that does seem to be fairly adult-centered. In what ways did the district gather information from students about the new school and how they felt about its location?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in my reporting, I was able to interview a student who is a current student at Concord High School, but she also had attended Millbrook and Broken Ground and then Rundlett. Her family lived on the Heights, and she commuted daily as a middle schooler to the Rundlett location and felt really strongly that the school should remain where it is. The interesting thing in talking about her, though, was kind of the breakdown of communication there. I think within the school conversations, students were asked, what features would you like to see in new classrooms? What would you like on the playground? But then talking to her, it was more evident that it's kind of a breakdown in communication with families. She noted in particular that for her friends whose parents weren't native English speakers, they might not be informed about what the decisions are happening just due to a lack of outreach and kind of breakdown in engaging those communities. And it's something that we've seen the district do before and do well. Ahead of the school year, they host a back to school night every year at Keach Park. At that event, there are translators, there's a distinguished outreach to get families to attend while they're there. There's connections saying, we'd like to meet you, we are teachers, we are district leaders, we want to serve you as best we can. But when it came to engaging students and families, particularly from marginalized communities with the middle school project, there's been a breakdown in the communication to that level.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Alex. One of the articles states that students would go without outdoor spaces for sports and recess for several years if the school is built at the current site. Yet Rollins Park is right across the street, Memorial Field is within walking distance, and there are other options that could be explored. Looking at the gigantic state property, sharing with other schools that are even very nearby. Were alternate areas for sports and recess ever discussed?
Hello everyone, my name is Alexander Rapp. I'm the sports reporter at the Concord Monitor. So my story was all about what's the future of athletics for the middle school. And to answer your question, I believe there were some discussions around logistics and how if there was a rebuild at Rundlett, that would leave, if they were to rebuild there, the fields would not be available for multiple years, as you stated. And so exploring other opportunities elsewhere would be a possibility. However, if you look at Rollins Park right now, Concord field hockey already plays on that field and they use it quite often. And at the end of the day, it comes down to logistics. At Rundlett, currently, between practices, PE, recess, they would have to relocate around 1,200 hours across the entire school year to other spaces. And considering that Concord High already uses Memorial Field pretty much all the time, I mean, they use it for multiple sports, soccer, football, cheer, a lot of events go on at Memorial Field, which is currently in the process of being renovated, or there are plans to renovate it. So I think for my story, basically what I found is that relocating middle school athletics to other spaces would be a very complicated logistical issue between transportation and time that would not make it a necessarily very practical nor feasible solution.
It's working? Can you hear me? I just want to preface my suggestion to John by making a pitch for those in the audience who may want to put their name on a waiting list to be on the advisory board that we've been on for the last 10, 11 months. The best part is interacting with these young, wonderful reporters. They all have hair except for Steve, I guess. But think about it. It's a great experience to get to respect and understand your newspaper. And theoretically, we're supposed to make them better, but they've educated us. I've got a suggestion, not a question for John. I've been in Concord since the 80s and just happened to have 4 fairly close friends who are not only on the school board, but at certain times in the last 3 decades have been ahead of the school board. One of them is Clint. I don't know if Clint's still here, that was here before. And it dawned on me there's got to be many more that I don't know very well. And I thought there's a field of experts that would be great to do a poll on to see what they think about this, not only on the questions of the amendments, but also on where the school ought to be and how quickly we should move or not. So I'm making a suggestion of that, and I want to get your thoughts on that, John.
That's all. That's a good question. So, and thank you for the suggestion, and thank you for the plug. So if anyone would like to be considered for the Concord Monitor Reader Advisory Board, use the same email, news@cmonitor.com, because next year we'll be putting together a new board. Thank you, Nick. So we talked about how we were best going to use our time, our reporter time for this series. And I could let you in on a little secret that we are going to be interviewing Cass Ardinger, a former school board member, school board president. But what we didn't want to do is just talk to the same people and over again. So really what we wanted to do, and one of the things that we spent a lot of time doing, is trying to survey the community. What does the community think? And we were trying to wrestle with how do we get a handle on that? We're hearing a lot of stuff, and we were hearing dismissive comments. Well, that's just a vocal minority. And so how to get a pulse of how people are feeling, we wanted to do our own poll, which was a really heavy lift for us, but we actually did that. And so I was gonna have Jeremy talk about how that poll happened. So to answer your question, we wanted to dedicate our resources, rather than talking to some of the folks who have been in key positions of the past, to actually trying to figure out how people currently feel. So go ahead, Steve. Or Jeremy. Jeremy, please talk about the poll.
I can do that. So I joined the Monitor last spring, and as I started to learn about this issue, it was people opposed to it who were very vocal about it. And the question I had was, are these the folks who can come out to school board meetings rather than the folks who can't? And more broadly, do they represent the city at large? And we figured out, or we decided the only way we're going to get some sense of that was to do a somewhat random poll of the city. We don't claim to be statisticians, though we did communicate with the UNH Survey Center in developing our methodology. And what we landed on, what felt manageable to us, was to poll 100 people in every ward except for the first ward, which is primarily in the Merrimack Valley School District. And we figured the most random way to do that felt like something we could do was to randomize streets in every ward, and then knock on doors at the streets that were at the top of our randomized list. We ended up, and this was, I should say, a total newsroom effort, which was what was so cool about it. Every one of our reporters went out to a ward and started knocking on doors, and we ended up polling folks from 36 streets in the city, all across the city, and we asked them, I think, 15 questions ultimately, we wanted to get a sense of what they thought of the decision last year on the location of the school, what they think should happen now, and what they think of the charter amendments that are going to be on folks' ballots next month. And we asked a lot of demographic questions to get a sense of whether those factors played a role in how people felt about this. Just some top-line findings on the question of how the what decision should have been made last year. About 40%, I think it was 44% of folks had been in favor, they said, or would have been in favor, they said, of rebuilding at Rundlett, about 20% at Broken Ground, and there was a significant number of folks who were undecided. Then we asked a slightly different question, is what do you think should happen now? And here we found folks are really evenly split. There was a good segment of folks who favored the decision to build the school at Rundlett last year, who no longer think that should be reversed for a number of reasons. Then we asked the question about the charter amendments. These amendments have been framed as a referendum on the decision last December, so we wanted to know how much alignment there was between how people felt on the charter amendments, which wouldn't in and of themselves reverse the decision, though they could set up a vote to do so. And we found that there was pretty widespread support for the amendments. About 3/4 of folks said they supported them, compared to about 20% of folks who didn't. And I guess the last thing I would say about this poll is we felt this was the most manageable thing that we could do that would really give us a sense of the pulse of the city. We're not claiming, as I said, to be statisticians, but we do think it gives us a better sense of how people are thinking about this than we had before we did it.
Okay, this question is for Catherine. Some residents feel that the board has failed to make a compelling argument to families and the public for why they chose the Broken Ground site, other than the often cited $5 million savings. In your reporting and research, did you come across any data, talking points, or information to be shared with parents and families that provided substantive information and arguments for the relocation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, backing up a little bit, I think part of why people felt so caught off guard by the vote in December was because until the summer preceding that, or the spring preceding that, the school board had been largely focused on the Clinton Street location. And when that fell through, they were left to seriously consider Broken Ground and South Street as the two options on the table. They did, in that summer and that fall, hold a number of meetings where they got information from their architects comparing the two sites, benefits, potential layouts, those kind of things. And both before the school board made its vote in December at the meeting and in the year since, school board members have laid out every reason they believe that the Broken Ground site is better. It's not just cost, they're worried about disruption to students, especially those most impacted by the pandemic. They're worried about those interruptions to sports. They're excited about the outdoor learning opportunities at Broken Ground, opportunities that are already well used by the schools that are there in that area. You know, whether or not those are compelling reasons is up to each individual person, but I would say that the school board has made a good effort to lay out the reasons that they believe Broken Ground is better.
This question's for Jeremy. There's no other place to put them has been a refrain, as well as the argument that if a new school was built at the current site, it would be too disruptive for students. Yet many communities have come up with creative solutions for this, including temporarily relocating students to other schools or facilities. Was this discussed at all?
Yeah, so Catherine, John, and I met with district administrators, including Superintendent Murphy, about 2 weeks ago. And I think, John, you were the one who asked this question. And Superintendent Murphy said basically that there isn't a building that we have now to put folks in. She also talked about portable options, which some school districts use. And she said basically that would be extremely expensive. They would be challenging places to educate students, and then after the project was done, they would be of no use. So she said, all things being equal, if they did have to rebuild at Rundlett, the students would stay in the building while that construction was happening.
Okay, and I think this is our final question.
Well, as our regular board meetings go, you're free to ask us any question that you like, so we can entertain more questions. Okay.
I'll go with the one on our sheet for now, which is for Catherine. Environmental impact studies for the broken ground site have been discussed at other meetings, but there are still questions. Have more details been shared by the board about the environmental impact of clearing 25 acres of forest?
Yeah, so as you know in your question, a preliminary wildlife assessment was performed in the early fall, I want to say September of 2023. That assessment found that there were endangered and threatened species habitats on the property, but the assessment was that they would not be meaningfully impacted by the project. But when we talk about things being up to date, I do think it's important to note that study was done at a time when the project anticipated developing 8 acres of land on the property, and that number has risen to between 22 and 24 acres of trees that they'll be clearing. I was unable to find a more in-depth or up-to-date environmental assessment of the broken ground site since that study.
Okay.
And I'll add to that, Wendy. When we were laying out the series and going through our archives, basically our documents that we had, and we're trying to compare and contrast plans. Steve and I had the 2 plans up on our screens. We had 2 different screens, and we're like, okay, this is what they voted on in December. This was the plan. And so if you look at where broken ground is, there's an area of open space right behind broken ground. And then the building would be in the woods, but the complete envelope of the school project was fairly compact. They were going to cut 8 acres of trees, but they were clearly trying to limit the expansion into the uncut forest. Fast forward to the current plan, the new school would be farther away from the existing school, and then all of the land to the north, not all of the land, but a whole new swath of land would be cut out to the north. There's larger parking lots, there's more roads, there's more fields. So it was striking to see that you can see an attempt to limit the environmental impact, and then you can see what a full build out looks like, which is a tripling of the cutting of the trees there. So these are things that when you read the stories in the paper, you realize there's incremental changes. Some of the changes are significant, but when you can see them side by side, and we did that on the first day, we tried to put those 2 images next to each other so that people could understand the project was this and now it's this.
So was there any justification given for that? And then as another follow-up, will there be an opportunity to do more reporting on that particular question with the board, or to find out the answer to that?
In terms of the environmental impact?
In terms of what John was talking about, how you can look at the picture, which you printed in the paper, and see how that's changed over time. And it was shocking to hear 25 acres. If you've ever been in that beautiful section of woods, walked on those trails, it's shocking to think about. So just a personal aside there. But
part of the reason the plans had changed, my understanding, is that original layout, not only was it a more preliminary design, but it also planned on the middle school and broken ground sharing athletic facilities. And a big request when this district and the school board went to students and said, what do you want? What do you want in this school? field space and athletics were among the things they said they wanted. They wanted basketball courts, they wanted baseball and softball, and there wasn't room to put them in the original, more compact layout. And so the decision of the architects was to put those fields out behind the school instead, and that was a big thing behind the change. But the school did as well move further north on the property.
I have a question to Jeremy. I really enjoyed yesterday's article about teachers. I enjoyed your poll article too. That was amazing work. I knew Rundlett was falling apart, but the comment about the baby bird's foot coming through the ceiling made me realize it's really falling apart. And it was pretty clear that the 3 science teachers want things to move along, ideally over broken ground, not to have more delays before things to happen. Was there any thought in your mind, or maybe interviewing and maybe polling the teachers? They're an important part of this, maybe the most important part of this in some ways. Any thoughts about doing something like that, getting more information on what teachers felt at Rundlett who are working there? The implication was from the article that they're all on board to move along, but maybe more stories or more interviews would help.
Yeah, it's a really good idea, and we wanted to bring the teachers in the same way Michaela wanted to bring students and folks from marginalized communities in, because we hadn't heard from them as much as we have other people. And in contrast to the poll, that was a totally un-random sampling approach. Right. And I think it would be a great idea to poll teachers and understand how universal their sentiment is. One thing that was striking about the teachers I did talk to, which for the most part we found over the course of a tour a few of us did of the building led by middle school principal Jay Richard, was they didn't really have strong opinions on the location in and of itself. What they had strong opinions about was the prospect of spending 2 or more years in that building, and they felt that was untenable for them. They also felt that the construction occurring within at certain points 30 feet of their windows would compound the challenges that they face on a daily basis. But I like the idea of polling teachers. I don't know if we have the time to do that or exactly how we do that. It might be a little easier to do than polling city residents, though.
I've got a follow-up question, Jeremy. I'm having difficulty trying to grasp how Rundlett got to be in such a dilapidated state. It's part of a big equation for me. In your research and talking to people, did you discover how we went from Rundlett as a school to Rundlett as this broken down, dysfunctional bird nest?
Yeah, I wonder if that might be a better question for you. I don't know if you have a better sense of that.
I would say that's a question that constituents could direct towards the district and the school board. It's not one I have personally put to them directly at this point. But something perhaps relevant that the district and the school board have noted is that COVID delayed this project a decent amount, and that delays to the project, it's not starting as soon as they thought it was going to start when they first took the leap to consider studying this and moving it on. But as to why it's in the state it's in, it's definitely a question I'm not equipped to answer as a reporter.
Well, the 3 of you took the tour with Principal Ricard, right? And in your very first story, Catherine, you pointed out something that he had lost sight of, which is the vinyl on the floors, the staircase has actually worn out, right? Because of all the foot traffic. So it's not like the vinyl can't be replaced. It can be, but there's been so many other things that have superseded that as a priority at the school, like leaking roofs and air conditioning and air circulation and all that kind of stuff is taking priority. And so I think that's the sense that I got, which is how it wound up in the state that it is. And the 3 of them all took tours, and you heard from the principal yourself what his opinion was.
I, for one, would be fascinated by a follow-up story of that, because that's not 5 years of COVID. That's multiple years of somebody looking the other way when something needs to be repaired.
I'm just thinking about that, Nick. That could go to your point of interviewing past school board presidents and understanding what the school was like when they were leading the school board. But I think those are good unanswered questions that we should look into.
It definitely was. That definitely was after Jeremy's story published. You know, we read comments, we look at our emails. That was the one I saw the most often of people saying, well, wait a minute, how do we get here? So I agree, it's something we should look into.
So voters are going to be going to the polls soon. It's coming up very soon. So the amendments that our community will be voting on, John, have you thought any about about the coverage of that topic and sort of follow-up and how you may assign your reporters to cover that?
Yes. One of the things, the series is not over, right? So our conclusionary story is going to try and summarize some of these the ballot questions, because one common question that we've been getting, and the phone rings in the newsroom and I get the calls from people. I got a call from a 94-year-old woman who's filling out her absentee ballot, and she wanted to know, how do I vote on these two questions? And I was like, well, that's a difficult question for me to answer. But her position, she was like, I don't like this, I don't like the vote, I don't like what happened, I don't like the new location, so how should I vote? And I said, well, the questions don't actually, you're not voting on Rundlett, you're voting to allow a future vote. And so she was like, okay. But that, I think the wording of the questions, and specifically the first question, begins with the word no, I think gives people, when you're reading it, it gives people a little jar, because it's not really written as a question, it's written as a statement. No school shall be. And so you have to agree with this negative statement in order to say that you want the public to vote on future school projects. So I do think the wording of the questions has been a challenge to people. And we're going to clarify that as much as we can. We're calling it charter amendments in plain English, but we can't rewrite the charter amendment. So we'll do our best to let people know how to vote, to cast a yes or no vote depending on how they feel about the issues. And back to Jeremy's point too, when we were asking people that question, we asked it very broadly about, do you support more public?
Should I say what we asked?
Yeah, ask the question, please.
The question we asked, we didn't use the word charter amendments because we worried that people would not know what we were referring to. The question we asked, and I'm paraphrasing, was, do you think voters should be able to vote on, or let me read it because I don't want to get it wrong.
I think I remember it was, should the school board have to get the approval of the voters anytime they want to move one of the district schools or sell a significant piece of its property? That was the way we asked the question.
Which is not the way they're written on the ballots.
Yeah, and it also consolidates the two questions, and some people have different opinions on the two of them. There's hands in the audience. I don't know if we can hear from them, or what do you think?
I'm not sure we can. You said there's a question in the audience?
Sure.
Sure. How loud is your voice?
My voice is pretty loud.
All right, go for it. Here, let me give you this so we can get it onto the common TV.
I guess I ought to identify myself. My name is Bert Cooper. I've kind of been following this for the past, since 2022, with some of the stuff prior to that. My question as a voter, I would want to know how. So Oyster River Middle School did their renovation on site and demolition in something less than 2 years. They're slightly, their school was, as I understand it, 900 feet long because it was a extension over years. When the comparison between Clinton Street and Rundlett was made, the suggestion was it would take roughly a year longer to complete Rundlett than it would take to complete Clinton Street. So 24 months for Clinton Street, a year for Rundlett. That's now 5 years plus a year for Fields for Rundlett versus Broken Ground. So my question is this: shouldn't we be curious why that extended? Because there haven't really been any. There's no information on the record explaining why that timeline blossomed. This may be in a story you're about to report, but that also implicates a $15 million extra cost. It also implicates when the schools could open. The other thing too is, like, there was $1 million extra site work that disappeared in the comparison between Broken Ground and Rundlett between November of 23 and the things the school board put out like last week. So the question is, when these things disappear, should we be curious as to why the numbers suddenly changed?
I think the answer is yes. You should be curious. I can say that we sat with the school district officials and we asked a lot of these questions. Not that particular. We didn't bring up Oyster River, but we definitely brought up the proximity of construction to the existing Rundlett school. The gentleman from Harvey Construction said, it can be done. We're doing it right now in Salem, New Hampshire. It can be done, but it's going to cost time and money. Whether that, but backing up, we had asked for the cost comparisons from the school district. We had asked for this information in advance. It wasn't a sudden request on our part, and it's the architect that comes up with all of these cost estimates. It's the architect that came up with $152 million. It's the architect that makes recommendations. The architect said they would get us the information. The school district said they would get us the information, and when it came to our deadline, they didn't provide us with many pieces of information that we asked for. They did give us a lot of information, and that was the basis for our series, but there were certainly missing things. We don't really know, and they say that it's going to cost $15 million extra to build at Rundlett because of the backtracking. We're unable to compare that to what the site costs are and what the site work is and what all the infrastructure costs are at the other school. I think that's a valid question. The public's been asking it since July. It's October. There's a vote coming. It's a legitimate question.
Thank you. Molly Swanson. I appreciate, all the things that we could have done differently. Of course, you can always say in retrospect how you might have done it differently. But I really, feel a very practical impulse to say, we are here and now, and obviously knowing about the condition of Rundlett is very serious. And certainly with my children coming up, I want a place for them to go to middle school that's not a trailer or falling apart. So I would love to have some reporting about the way that things transpire after the vote takes place. Let's say, if yes for both questions occurs, how does the timeline get affected? And how inadvertently that may really penalize the kids and everyone involved.
Thank Thank you for the question. Is it okay? Thank you for the question. I agree. It's one of the most pressing ones that we've agreed we have an obligation to help people answer. Stay tuned for the rest of the series is what I would say. With a note that like a certain degree of what happens if they pass is uncertain, but we will unpack that in coming coverage. And if you have questions about that coverage, please reach out to us.
Do you want to talk about the future uses of Rundlett, which we asked about that we haven't really talked about? If everything goes forward according to plan and a new middle school is built at broken ground, we did ask what will become of Rundlett.
So the school board has, as part of overseeing this project, a building committee. It's a large committee of teachers, professionals, parents, members of the community. One of the subcommittees of that will eventually be a group of people who will come up with recommendations about what the district should do with Rundlett. That committee hasn't been formed yet. It won't be formed for some time. In terms of what could happen, the city has, notably, the city has a right of first refusal over that property, and so that's a notable thing there. School board members haven't necessarily put out a ton of things that they want to see happen. The one I've heard the most is that they've noted that CRTC, the regional technical center that is currently attached to Concord High School, is one of the district's most popular programs and increasingly running out of space, and it has aspirations for programming that it currently is unable to provide. Some people have non-committally floated that as a possibility for the future of Rundlett, but in terms of what happens to that building is yet to be decided. I think that ties to a lot of anxiety people in the South End are feeling about this project.
You've got me asking more questions in my head about Rundlett, because it seems as though, yes, this is an enormous project, the Rundlett and Broken Ground, but I keep going back to, shouldn't it be all one conversation? What happens to Rundlett? What happens to Memorial Field? What happens to the new school? So some of the people talking about this have said, well, if it doesn't go to Rundlett, we'll save $5 million. It goes to Broken Ground. Well, if they keep Rundlett, and it goes to a new Voc Tech, whatever they're calling it, well, there's going to have to be construction because we've just learned the building's falling down. So does that $5 million go back into the new build, or does that $5 million help tent the asbestos? I think it would be fascinating to find out what they're thinking about, specifically with numbers attached to it for Rundlett.
I agree.
In the school district's defense, they're paying for these experts to give them these analysis, and they have to choose what information they want first, second, third, fourth. If they were to literally say, give us a complete, line by line item for the demolition of Rundlett, give us 2 side-by-side designs of 2 middle schools, what I think a lot of people in the community have said they wished had happened, it would have taken a considerable amount of effort to have all of that detail so you can make an A and B comparison, which I think is why they made the decision to locate the school before they actually had the full design, which seems a little backwards, but they were trying to accelerate this. And I do get it that there's an element of, we don't have this information because we haven't asked our professionals for it. And so they've been trying to pump out a lot of information, and so there's some information as you think about, I wish I knew this, I wish I knew this, I wish I knew that I think we'll want to see for some time, but there's also, seems that some information is past due.
Thank you.
You may have time for one more question.
I have one more. I'm wondering, with all of the opportunities you've had to talk to lots of different people across the community about this topic, do you have some impressions or takeaways from it in terms of just how our community is feeling about this, this topic that has really created some real division, I think, in our community? you have any thoughts on that?
We can all answer this because we were all knocking on doors and have talked to people in various different places. But one thing that jumped out to me from speaking with folks is that regardless of how folks felt about what should happen now or what should have happened when the decision was made last December, to a person, people said, I really wish there was more communication on this. And I think the school board, we've asked them about that. They've said we tried to communicate with folks. People didn't really come to the meetings that we had in the lead up to this decision. And I mean, that's how they feel about it. But communication is hard, and we're obviously in the communication business. So part of our job and part of the reason we did this series was to answer some of these questions, and they've raised other questions, which is great. But that was a big theme that I was hearing.
I think another theme would also just be uncertainty. I think there's a lot of uncertainty on all sides. You have residents who want a new school, but they're uncertain what that will look like. They're uncertain how it will impact their kid, the timeline of it. If you have a student who's going to be a middle schooler, what does it look like for them? If you have a current fifth grader, are they going to be in this dilapidated, falling down Rundlett for the rest of their time? And then you also have uncertainty on the board's part. I mean, this has been years of conversation. A lot of board members have entered the conversation while it's been ongoing. The same thing will happen in November as well. So I think while people want a clear timeline, a clear plan, a clear path forward, to some degree, decisions like location can provide that, but then like if we just talk through, what happens next? What happens to the old building? What happens with shifting costs and inflation and other factors? There's always gonna be like uncertain variables, and I think we've heard that from all facets of the conversations we've been having.
Anybody have any more questions? All right, well, thank you all. That wraps up tonight. We really thank you for coming out. Thank you for Concord TV, Concord High School. We have a lot of coverage coming up. We have voter guides on our website. We'll have one coming out on November 2nd in the Saturday paper. So be on the lookout. There's a big election coming up. So thank you for coming.